So welcome everyone. Very nice to have you all here with us. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Qesher. The other is Sebastian. You can see us both here. We started our project 4 years ago, and our aim has been ever since to introduce Jewish communities from all over the world. And from that grew out the project of the series of the Qesher Book Club, in which we introduce Jewish-themed books that are somehow, in one way or another, related to our overall theme of Jewish communities all over the world. And maybe some of you have seen or have noticed that we are doing this book club series in cooperation with another organization called Jewish Unity Through Diversity. And we are happy to welcome Jora Arusi here today, who is representing this organization. And soon I'm going to pass the words to her because she's going to interview Corie, who is our speaker today. Before I do that, I just want to introduce briefly Corie Adjmi, who is the author of The Marriage Box, which is the book that we're going to discuss today. Corie is the best-selling, award-winning author of the novel The Marriage Box and the short story collection Life and Other Shortcomings. She has won a number of international book awards, American Fiction Awards, Best Book Awards, and a Benjamin Franklin Award as well. When Corie is not writing, she does volunteer work, cooks, draws, bikes, and hikes. She and her husband have 5 children and a number of grandchildren, with more on the way. She lives and works in New York City, so we are happy to have Corie here with us, who will share about The Marriage Box. And now I'm going to pass the word to Jora to introduce briefly Jewish Unity Through Diversity, and then we'll get to the presentation.
First, I want to say we apologize in advance. Dora and Drora, we understand, is very confusing. It's our parents' fault, sorry. But hi, I'm really excited to be here, and I just love the Qesher Book Talks, and I love everything Qesher's been doing. We've been talking for quite a few years already when I was at the American Sephardi Federation, and it's just, I'm happy to see all of you here, and I'm happy to be able to be a part of it and have our Jewish Unity Through Diversity Institute continue it, because really we have a lot of the same goals and passions to make sure that everyone around the world understands the full Jewish narrative and really understands the different stories that are in as part of the Jewish people. And we do it through educational tools for teachers, online courses, online programming, and part of the online programming also collides. So we're excited to be doing this together today, but you didn't come to hear me. So I'm going to pass it over to Corie, who's going to talk about her book. And I saw that one person said they didn't hear about the book. So I just want to make sure that you understand that the book is actually about the SY, as she calls it. And I'm sure she'll explain what that means, community in Brooklyn. So Corie, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and a little bit about the book.
Sure. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Once I heard about the mission of these 2 organizations, I just thought this would be a wonderful opportunity, and I'm very grateful to be here. I didn't set out to write a book that would spark conversations about Jewish diversity, but since publication, which was last May, I found that I was super pleased to introduce the Orthodox Syrian Jewish community to the world, because we were a small community and not well known. And so the conversations around the community and how we are different than other Jewish communities has really been enlightening and important for me. I'd like to talk about Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. This TED Talk really inspired me and had me feeling very delighted that the Marriage Box could contribute to this conversation around diversity, even in its small way. Because what the message is in that TED Talk is that when a group of people is represented as one thing over and over again, and only one thing or a very limited number of things, that group of people gets dehumanized. And dangerous tropes get formed, and that's how stereotypes get established. And so the conversation became really important to me to talk about how we are Ashkenaz and Sephardic, and we have dark hair and light hair, and we are rich and poor, and we are Reform and Orthodox, and artists and doctors and entrepreneurs, and we're from all over the globe. And for months after publication, I shined a light on our diversity. And when I went on book tour, and I was in California and New York and Florida and Virginia Beach and New Orleans and all over, I would hear the stories of how different Jewish communities were celebrating and acknowledging their Judaism. And the stories differed, but there was a certain light amongst all the stories. And that was a focus for a while. And then October 7th happened. And it became clear that while it's super important to talk about our diversity, our unity is really beautiful. And so I now spend a lot of time talking about both the unity and diversity of our community. And there's more to be said around that. And maybe we'll get to that later. I would love to continue that conversation. It's been really important to me. So the book we're talking about is The Marriage Box. That's the book I wrote. And the premise of that book is actually based on my real life. The book is fiction. The details are made up. The plot lines are made up. But I did grow up in New Orleans, and I didn't know much about my Sephardic Syrian background. But when I started to date, when I was around 16, my parents decided they wanted to move back from New Orleans, our Reform lifestyle, and not knowing anything about our Syrian background, and go back to where they had grown up, which was in Brooklyn in the Syrian community. And they wanted me there, and they wanted me to start dating there. So I left my progressive school in New Orleans, where I thought I was going off to college. I was a cheerleader, and they put me in a yeshiva. And it kind of, the expectation was, seemingly to me at least, it seemed overnight, they wanted me to get married by the time I was 18. To say the least, this was culture shock. Moving a 16-year-old girl is never easy, but with all these differences, it was really, it was quite an experience. And that's the premise of The Marriage Box. So all that part's true. The character from the book, Casey Cohen, has that same story. In the book, I have Casey doing something shameful. That's why the family moves. In my real life, I did not do anything shameful. It was just my parents wanted us to be back in community life in New York. And I thought I'd read just the prologue of the book to give you a flavor of, or a little sampling of what the book's like or about. And then we'll continue to talk after. So this is the prologue of the book, The Marriage Box. The night started out like every Syrian Jewish wedding. The florist pinned white orchids around the chuppah. Caterers folded yarmulkes into black half moons. A photographer snapped our picture, me, 18 years old, in a high neck, long sleeve, Victorian style wedding gown, nails polished rebel red. And Tracy, my best friend, in off-white satin, neckline plunging enough to make people stare. Casey, you don't have to do this, you know, Tracy said. While I'd spent the summer shopping for my trousseau and planning my wedding, Tracy had spent the summer getting ready for college, where she'd bar hop and dodge unwanted pregnancies. Now and then she'd study. She couldn't understand why I was adhering to my family's expectations, marrying a Syrian Jew, shopping at Tiffany's for wine and water glasses, contentedly testing chicken and eggplant recipes, dashed with allspice. Smile, the photographer instructed. Tracy looped her arm around my back. You might as well smile now while you're still happy. We posed in front of a 6-foot golden Jewish star. Why can't you just live with him like every other normal American girl? This isn't 1882 Aleppo, it's 1982 America. This isn't America, I said. It's Brooklyn. In the few years since my family had moved from New Orleans, returning to our roots in Brooklyn, I'd learned the hard way there were rules. A teenage girl was taught to dress for seduction, but was forbidden to have premarital sex. She couldn't date until she was 16, but had to be married by 18. And she certainly couldn't live with a man unless she was his wife. And what's with your dress? Tracy went on. Why'd you pick something so virginal? She used her fingers to form a halo over her head and smiled, posing for the camera. Hands on her hips, she looked at me. You're doing exactly what you swore you wouldn't do. You said you didn't want to be like your mother, who went straight from her father's house into her husband's. You said you didn't want to be like the other Syrian girls who got married before they were of legal drinking age, before they had a driver's license. I have my license, I said, turning from Tracy. The guests from New Orleans scoped out the Brooklyn synagogue like they were stepping on foreign soil. They'd never been to an Orthodox Syrian wedding, and you could tell from their faces their foreheads crinkled. They were having a hard time accepting the idea of an 18-year-old getting married. Plus, the whole affair was kind of like Fiddler on the Roof, spiked with lifestyles of the rich and famous. A party for 800 people, where every woman in the room, regardless of age or religiosity, wore a skin-tight dress, size 2, and Christian Dior stilettos, dolled up like Barbie with long black hair. I was an exception, with light hair and fair skin, forever sticking out. A blonde, my mother always said, as if I were a foreign object. In this house, unbelievable. Tracy stood by my side. This is like the Twilight Zone. I can't believe you're getting married. Sadie, Sadie, married lady, Tracy sang the Barbra Streisand lyric. As a tall waiter in a black tuxedo walked by, he smiled at her. Tracy cupped her hand over her mouth. He's cute, she whispered. He is. Tracy wagged a finger at me. There'll be no more of that, young lady. Bye-bye to the good old days, I said, realizing I didn't know how to behave around cute single boys anymore. Tracy smiled at her handsome waiter and took 2 shots of arak off his silver tray. She handed me one. Drink up, she said, you're going to need this. I want to get married. I want to do this, I remember telling Tracy. But memory, like love, is fickle. It's true I thought my life would unfold like a romance novel, one scintillatingly evocative chapter after another. When you're 18, you think your dreams are undeniable truths. At least I did. I had no clue my brain was still developing, or that during my first year of marriage, I'd grow an inch. So, should we go to the interview?
We can start. Thank you so much for that. I think it gives us a little bit of a glimpse through the book. So thank you for sharing that. And you said it took you 20 years to actually put the book together and get it out. Yeah. Explain that to us a bit, if you would.
There were so many reasons. So one is I was a young mom with little kids, and writing a novel is much harder, at least for me, than writing short stories. Some people find it the other way around, but it wasn't that way for me. And so I started writing short stories first. And so I also had put out Life and Other Shortcomings in the time I was working on the novel. So that was part of the delay. Plus, I think because the story was so related to my real life, it took time. I needed distance. And I spent many, many years protecting my characters. You know, I didn't want people thinking if the mother did something that was less than desirable, that it was my mother or my husband. So something you learn from reading the back of the book is the husband doesn't want Casey to go to college. That's not true in my real life. So it just took me time to be able to write this book in a way that felt respectful to the community, respectful to the people in my family, with a bit of humor. I think that was the biggest challenge of all. Plus, I was a teacher, so my background was in education, and I had a lot of learning to do. I would read with a pencil in my hand, taking notes in the margins, and taking classes and going to conferences as well. And again, that took years and time. I really wanted to write the best book I could write. I wasn't in a rush to just get something out.
And you do deal with some sensitive topics there, so I have to say. And so let's start with the first one. How does, for lack of a better way to phrase this, how does a nice Jewish Syrian family end up in New Orleans?
Oh, well, my parents both grew up in Brooklyn, and they wanted to stay, actually, but work presented itself in New Orleans, and my father at some point just said to my mom, I think they were married like 6 months, and he said, we have to go. I have this opportunity. But they always thought one day they'd go back. But they actually liked life in New Orleans a lot. So the years just rolled by. And then when I started dating, they were like, okay, it's time.
Okay. So now let's talk about the.
You're muted.
That was
Yeah.
weird. I don't know how I muted myself. Sorry about that. Or somebody muted me.
Okay.
I apologize. So you talk about the discrimination in the South. And we'll talk about some interesting parallels afterwards, but let's just talk about that. And that Casey, who's the main character, right? Her family doesn't necessarily buy into the whole anti-Black prejudice that comes up actually in a specific incident where a home is robbed. So can you just talk about that a bit?
Sure. You know, in working on the book over all those years, I changed my mind or grappled with, I'd say, what was the book actually about? And I went from thinking maybe it's a book about identity, or maybe it's a book about love, and my ideas kept changing until I finally landed on the word power. And once I realized that that's what this book was about, it became so much easier to write every scene. And so in this book, I do address not only the idea of power in terms of there's also class, and the book is about Casey's individual need to find her own power. I mean, that's her arc. So when I do these talks, especially if people haven't read the book, I don't want to give too many details or any specifics from the book, but that's pretty much what Casey's journey is, to find her own power. And so that was just, it was a little bit of a glimpse into New Orleans at the time. It was setting the tone of what life was in the 70s in New Orleans, but it was also a light on what was happening. And like I said, the theme of power in the book.
Right, on all the different levels.
Got it.
Okay.
And how do you get it? And I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I just said all the different levels and in all the different communities, and it continues across. But you can continue what you were saying, sorry.
So that was it.
So then you have the parallel, or you have another situation in Brooklyn when they get there to this insular community. You come from this very different type of a community. You come to the Syrian community in Brooklyn. Sorry, one minute. And one of the things I love here is, I apologize. Give me a
Your
minute.
time.
Sorry, I don't know what just got over me. So when they get to Brooklyn, there's this conversation between Colette, one of Casey's friends, and Casey.
Mm-hmm.
And it begins with, Casey says, Colette, school opens your world. Why don't you go to school? Gives you these choices. And Colette's response is, blah, blah, blah. Who says that's a good thing? And the response is, most people. And Colette says, most American people. And Casey says, well, we're American. Not really. And so I just thought that was such a telling part of the story. Not really. Can you explain that a little in the Syrian community and what that actually means?
Sure. So the community has changed a lot since 1980. So this book takes place in 1980, and we can talk about some of the ways the community has changed in that time. But there was definitely an evolution. The community came to America probably in the early 1900s. So in the 1980s, when I first got there, they were still relatively new. It was like, 2 generations. I was the 3rd generation. And I think there was still a real tie and attachment to Aleppo, and they were closer to the customs, and they felt insulated or insular in a certain way that me growing up in New Orleans, not a part of the community, felt less of that. And I felt much more part of American culture and society than I did part of the Jewish world. Not that I had a really strong sense of Jewish identity, but I probably wouldn't have put it first. I might have felt more American. I mean, my husband and I used to have these conversations years ago when we first got married, and people change. I feel my Jewish identity even stronger today than I did. But this community, I think, felt it more back then. And so while they were American, they still had a sense of maybe we belong here or maybe we don't. We'll see. Where I felt very American and very safe, and this was my home. And so I had those characters kind of playing with that idea.
And part of that plays out in the concept of each individual's place in the home. So it was very obvious that the Syrian women were expected to be obedient and the perfect hostess and always have the lahmanadijin in the freezer, so that you could just pull it out because obviously nobody's going to come and somebody's going to come and you have to serve them accordingly. And you created Casey to rebel against this. But her mother, even though she lived in New Orleans for all those years, she starts to toe the line when she comes back. And so I'm wondering if explain that a bit, if you would.
So the mother even is resistant when Casey's growing up in New Orleans. So we see that transformation in the mother. And I think what happened with the parents was they started to believe in the idea of community and appreciate the idea of belonging. And so the mother does start to change and tries to share with Casey that the community has beautiful values and this is a world that she belongs to and can also enjoy. There is some resistance on both their parts because they're in and out of the world, of the Syrian world. So I think they're both testing at different points of the book who they want to be. I mean, because even the mother is really, really young. I mean, she has Casey when she's 18. So she was also figuring out who she was. That's why for many, many years, I thought the book was a lot about identity before I realized it was about power. It's in there. It's a theme in the book.
Yeah, the identity definitely plays a role, I have to say. I might not have been the main focus, but there's definitely when everybody, well, some have read the book. I want to make it known that in the comments, they have been saying that they've heard you speak as well. So that's exciting to hear that people are up. And I do want to encourage those from the audience to write in your questions. We'll be accepting questions from the audience as well afterwards. So add them in throughout, but I'm going to continue with my questions in the meantime. So let's get to the title of the book. And it seems to be like the bane of Casey's existence, the marriage box. So these, and it's not exactly what we think of when you think of an Ashkenazi Orthodox community. That's not what we're talking about here. So without giving away the whole book, can you explain a little about the marriage box and how much of it was based on reality? I assume it's different today.
Sure. So the marriage box was basically just a section at a beach club area behind the pool where young kids would go hang out. So it wasn't like an official naming. It was like a nickname. Like the kids ended up hanging out in this section and they'd meet, go on a date, possibly end up getting married. And eventually the section became known as the marriage box. And Casey, the character in the book, doesn't want to have anything to do with the marriage box because she doesn't want to get married. And people ask me all the time, does the marriage box still exist? And for all these months, I've been saying no, but like marriage is still a very important value. And maybe they'll meet at parties. And I gave a book talk last Sunday at a synagogue in New Jersey, near where this beach club is. And one of the people said, they think it still exists, like a new version. I mean, it's not anything like concrete. It's not like an established thing. It's just like where the kids end up hanging out. And so I guess there is still a marriage box, a sort of marriage box.
Okay, so we're talking about the evolution of the community, but there still is a lot of
Well, I do say that in my author's note. I say there are so many ways in which the community has changed, and there are many ways it's exactly the same.
So let's talk about some of the traditions there. I really love the fact that you interwove some of the Arabic words into the narrative. And one of the traditions you bring up is the Swani. Am I
Swanny.
pronouncing it?
Mhm. Swanny.
Swanny, sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about it and its significance? I just got drawn into it.
Sure, sure. So originally it was the custom was that the groom's family would deliver to the bride's family the money needed to go to the mikveh, the ritual bath before the wedding night. And it would be delivered in a small little pouch or purse, and maybe a bottle of perfume was given. That was the original custom. By the time I got to the community in 1980, it's more what you see in the marriage box. It was an elaborate affair with 200 people and an elaborate menu of food and presents. So it wasn't just the money for the mikveh. It would be vases and jewelry and lingerie and slippers, and it had become an extraordinary event. And that was in the 80s. And the community was super wealthy in the 80s as well. It was the time when the country was wealthy, and we were coming, like I said, we got here probably in the 1900s, 1920. By 1980, they were a little more established. We had a little more money. And in the 80s, the community was much smaller, and pretty much everybody was doing really well. It doesn't look like that today, but that's how it was then. And so most people had these extravagant swannies where the custom was originally just to have the money for the mikveh. Like I said, the community is much bigger today, and we've gone back to basics. Today, it's not that. I haven't been to a swanny in years and years and years. Presents are given more discreetly, and a lot fewer presents too than in the 80s. It used to be displayed out. Like, it was so extravagant. It was just unbelievable. But it's more humble and private today.
So that's one of the ways we've talked about the community has evolved, maybe going back to its roots even. So I don't know if that's evolved or going back, but it's kind of nice. And then I have to say, once we're talking about some of the cultural intricacies, the word fishelby.
So it's fish LB, and I love that word too. So I love that you picked up on that. Fish LB means like get it off your chest. Like just say what's on your mind. So I'll, sometimes, and it's not really used all that much. I happen to use it because I love the word, but I don't hear it that often. But I'll call up my friend and be like, do you have a minute? I need to fish LB. Just like say what's on your mind.
I think I need to adopt that word. It's just such a great word. And there's no cultural appropriation here because it's all the Jewish culture. So I just want to, that's one of the things we talk about a lot. And you were talking about the unity before you were mentioning. I think that's one of the things, there's no reason we can't adopt from each other a little and
Absolutely.
Incorporate. So in bringing up lines from the book, one of the other things when you're talking about wealth is I also thought this just really epitomized the community. And when you're talking about the wealth is, they're talking about having kids, and Casey's friend Rochelle says that her husband can't wait to have kids. And then another friend says, Rick can't wait. He can't wait to change diapers. And Rochelle's response is, he won't change the diapers. The housekeeper will. And that's just seemed to be somewhat of the stereotype of the Syrian community as well. The woman has to be on top of things, and yet the housekeeper is in charge. So tell us a little bit how much that was true then and true now.
Right. So Casey's a teenager, and she's an angry teenager. She's sad, and she's an unreliable character. So we take what she says, knowing those things. So it's not that people didn't have housekeepers, they did, but she has like an edge about how she talks about things. Like I said, the community was doing well at the time, and they would have help. And that was part of, I've been talking about this a lot too. I think really in this community, and this is my own personal opinion, I think marriage is the biggest priority, the biggest value. And everything points to marriage and having more children. It's to have children, to have more children, the family. So the parties, the marriage box, to get married, to start the family, to housekeepers help you be able to run a beautiful home. Shatra is the word that, you know, when you have your freezer full so people can drop by any minute. And having more children, a housekeeper helps you to be able to have more children because you've got extra hands and help and support. So I think a lot is baked into the idea of perpetuating the family.
And that family is part of the greater community, right? Because we've talked about it being insular, but that also gives you the sense of belonging. And it sounds like you had it when you came to New Orleans. Casey somewhat had it, but you still was on the outside. I love that. Another quote from the book: once you're in, you'll never really be out, no matter what. Scandals, lies, addictions, jail sentences, infidelities, you belong. So again, how much of that is reality and how much of that is played up in the book?
So again, that's Casey's sharp, you know, observations. And it is true. It is true that there is a commitment to one another, that we have each other's backs. I do think that maybe this generation, that's changing a little bit. But historically, I feel like people really, you belonged. I think you belong. And even today, I mean, you belong, but I think people are a little, for whatever reason, again, this is my own opinion, maybe a little less forgiving, maybe a little bit more willing to stand on principle. Not that they weren't standing on principle before, it's just a different principle. The value before was, we're going to stick together no matter what. And where now maybe there's an expectation of a little more accountability.
And that's an important point when you're talking about power as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to, I've been watching, there are some wonderful questions in the chat. So I'm going to hand this over to Dora, because thank you very much. But I want to make sure that the audience gets to have their questions too. Thank you for listening. And I'm excited to hear the rest of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Corie, for reading from your book and introducing your book. And thank you, Dora, for asking questions and doing this wonderful interview. For those who joined late, I just want to introduce Dora again, that she is our partner from the Jewish Unity through Diversity Institute, and she has done many book talks and interviews and podcasts. So we are very happy to cooperate with her, and we will do some of our book talks also in the future in this interview form with Dora. So I just want to let the regular Qesher audience know that this is why we did this talk like this today. And now I'm going to read a few questions from the chat, and I also see some hands up. So I will also get to those. So there was a comment from Yafa. I don't know if you want to speak in your own words, but I thought it was interesting. She says that in the Jewish communities in Mexico, we do these boxes. So if Yafa, you want to share just a couple of sentences about that, that would be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, my brother got recently married in October, and it's my mother gave the bride like a huge it was not a box, it was like a collection of perfumes, and I remember sunglasses and purses, and it was brought to the mikvah, so everybody would see what my mother was giving her. And also when I got married, my mother-in-law gave me a box of 100 coins, and she said, I don't know where this tradition comes from, but I know it's a Jewish Syrian tradition. so you guys have wealth. And my mother-in-law also gave me all the towels and everything for the mikvah, and again shampoos and sandals and things like that.
Thank you, Yafa. I will read a few more questions from the chat, the ones that came in during the talk, before passing it on to the people who are raising their hands. Thank you also for that. A question from Mark: do the Syrian Jews still hang out in Deal and have an annual marriage fair in the Bahamas?
So, we've actually expanded. There's a part of the community in Deal. I actually live one town over, but we've grown in both directions, and we've gone more west because the community is pretty big now. I think we're up to like 80,000. And we do tend to travel together, not only our summer time in New Jersey, but I've never been on it, but there is a trip every January that a lot of people go on, and people do meet on that trip.
Thank you. A question from Lior: I'm sorry if I'm wrong. I think in the book, Casey never went to the physical marriage box, but she ended up married and kept in a metaphorical marriage box, stuck, kept in her place. Why did you decide to keep her from the physical space, but in the metaphorical box for most of the book?
Well, I think that was Casey's challenge. I think that was her journey, is she was being presented with lots of people's expectations, her family's expectations, her community's expectations, and she had to figure out who she was and what she wanted. So she was able to like avoid the marriage box, but she was based on her upbringing, based on her circumstances, she couldn't avoid the marriage. And that was her journey to figure out then what.
Thank you. And I'm just going to read a comment and then I'll pass the word to the raising hands. So Salwa wrote that Fesh Albi in Arabic literally translates to decompress my heart, to vent, so to speak.
I love that.
So I just wanted to voice that comment. I thought that was interesting. So now I'm going to call on Roslyn, and then Susana, and then Gianpaolo. So that will be the order. So Roslyn, you can start.
Good afternoon, and I thoroughly enjoyed the book and found it very interesting, and I was glad to introduced to that book. The one question I do have, the fact that Casey was married to Michael for 3 years and didn't have any children, why? That would be, I believe the community would be questioning the situation, and her mother-in-law certainly would want to know why and not have any grandchildren.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, for sure. So Michael was starting to put the pressure on her. I don't know if you remember. He was putting the pressure on her. She was avoiding. So I think that's just part of Casey's character too. Like, again, how is she going to meet her own individual needs when she's in this box with all these cultural expectations on her? So the whole book is about her negotiating, and she's kind of compromising and doing things that she doesn't want to do, but then taking her power back and then doing things that are good for herself. And because she's a teenager, so she's just learning her way.
Right. I mean, I'm a New Yorker by birth. Now I live in Florida, but I was kind of very familiar with the Syrian people because I was in the handbag market, and many people from the handbag market were from Syria, or as we refer to them, Syrians, whether they were or not. And I also own a Judith Lieber handbag.
Yeah.
I worked in the same building with Judith Lieber. So,
oh, wow.
But I found the book very interesting, and I recommend it to anyone who wants to learn a little more about the Syrian community of the 80s. But I think that it's a very interesting community even today. And I believe there's a large community in Queens in the Forest Hills area.
The community has definitely changed. So we didn't talk about this yet, but today women work, most of the women work. Kids go to college. People wait 3 years or more to have children. The women get married. Some still get married at 18, but my daughter was 27. So there have been many changes over the years. And like I said, there's plenty that has stayed the same, but we've evolved as well.
Do they marry? Do they
Sorry.
marry? No.
Do they marry?
Ashkenazics or
Yeah.
other?
So one of my grandparents was Ashkenaz. So that's in the book too. That storyline. And so that's 2 generations ago. And my friends, I'd say half of us are married to one Sephardic, one Ashkenaz partner. At least half.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So I'll pass the word to Susanna now.
Okay. I'm a women's health nurse practitioner, and as such, I was very disturbed by the women during pregnancy and the postpartum period starving themselves just so that they could fit into, whatever clothing. I mean, it's so it's terrible. It's so unhealthy. It's just terrible on a lot of different levels.
So I wasn't talking about weight, I don't think, in terms of like pregnancy. I don't know that it was related. Looks and weight are definitely a focus. But the thing I like to remind readers when we have these talks is that is not specifically something that the Syrian Jewish community values. We have a lot of beautiful values. It's not my favorite, but nonetheless, that is from assimilating in America. That that was not the value system when grandmothers came from Aleppo in the early 1900s. That started to become something important in the 80s, I'd say. So yeah, I don't know that there was anything specific about not eating during pregnancy. Definitely watching your weight and physically taking care of yourself is important.
I remember some character saying, "Oh, I'm just eating grapefruit because that way I can," it was very.
She was a teenager. That was before marriage. She was single. But yeah, I mean, it's not that was again Casey's sharp observation of something that she also disapproved of. She did not approve of that, and so what I tried to do with this book was shine a light on things that were questionable and maybe not our best values without being disrespectful and without being judgmental as well, because every community has their good and their bad, and who am I to say what's good and what's bad? And so without judgment, it was just a way to open up the conversation. Like, what are we teaching our young girls? What are our expectations of them? It was a way to open up the conversation. Absolutely. And so that's what was really hard about the book, to be able to bring those concepts to life, maintaining respect. Because like, for example, that doesn't come from nowhere. It came from American culture, probably.
Thank you. So the next question is Gianpaolo's.
Yes, I look forward to reading the book. It's traveling. It's traveling to Italy.
That's nice.
Yeah. I look really forward to it. And actually, I have about 10 years ago discovered with great joy a Aleppo ancestry in my family. The question is, the Aleppan community has a history of being relatively secluded and closed. For example, in the communication with the Damascus community down the road, and in the enforcement of the Takana of the 1930s, the prohibition to marry a convert, And so this is a bit the character has been in the past, the character of the community. Can you make a comparison, if possible, with the communities of Ashkenazi Hasidic Jews in New York? Can you see any similarities or differences between these two communities that are so eager and willing to preserve their own identity and their own culture?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, I think we are really proud of certain traditions and our culture and want to preserve them. And also, as time goes on, we are definitely not as insular as we used to be. And I think that's one of the things that has changed. I think, there was a lot of probably fear of going outside or being outside. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But my father used to always say that the Ashkenaz community is 50 years ahead of our community. And I think maybe that's just because the Ashkenaz community got to America before we did. But it's an evolution, and the community is changing. And a lot of people have a view of the community that stops in 1980. And a lot has happened since then. So I have to write another book, I think.
Do you mention the takana in your novel, or you don't mention that side of the restriction to intermarriage?
I did not mention it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the chat. I see here a comment from Arlene. She says, it's a beautiful community that helps each other in times of need as well. I think it's important for people to understand that too. And I just remember, Corie, where you wanted to also share a little bit about that there are many misconceptions regarding the Orthodox community or the Syrian Orthodox community, and that you want to also give a different light on that. So I don't know if you want to comment on the comment.
I'll even talk about, I talk a lot about Jewish representation in books and film. What do people see? Because as I said, how I started the talk was when you show a group of people the same way over and over again, that's how they get known. And maybe that's even happened with this community. So if you look at the Orthodox world, many of us, and things started to change in the 90s. So in our community, there was a split. And so some of the women wear wigs and skirts, and some of the women are like me, wearing jeans. You can't see, but just more American looking or modern, or I don't know what you would call it, but we look different in that way, but we live side by side. Often the Orthodox world is presented in books and film in a way that is very restrictive, where there are lots of restraints, where women are looking to get out. And those stories have to be told. Sometimes there's even abuse involved. And of course, those stories have to be told. But those aren't the only stories. That is not the whole Orthodox world. This community is an Orthodox community, and it doesn't look like My Unorthodox Life or Unorthodox, the book, the memoir, and the movie. And so I do think we need to be aware of having more Jewish stories, even our Holocaust stories. We need our Holocaust stories, but we're more than just our Holocaust stories too. And the more stories we tell, and the more we're seen, and the more we're known, I do believe that creates less hate. So.
Thank you. Question from Lior. What was your favorite bit of foreshadowing you used in your writing? And what do you think the homeless character is doing now?
Oh, my favorite piece of foreshadowing. I've never been asked that before. I guess even just the piece, I'll just go with the piece I just read you, the last line that she says she grows an inch in the first year of her marriage. So that's both physical and metaphorical. So there's a little clue. And the homeless man, I think Carl's going to be okay. Carl's doing okay. He's doing life on his terms.
I guess we will all need to read the book to
Yeah.
understand the exact meaning of this question. I don't know if this is a question to Corie or maybe to Gianpaolo, how the Sephardic Syrian Jews ended up in Italy.
Everywhere, they are everywhere, but they are concentrated in several places. I am the result of the encounter between Aleppan Jews and Jews from Greece. So there have been movement between Aleppo and Greece. For example, several chief rabbis of Aleppo were coming from Salonika. And so there has been always an exchange of people between the two communities, to the point that some Sephardic Jews from Greece, I mean, there are several family names of Aleppan Jews that trace back to, for example, the Francos and other family names that trace back to the Greek Sfaradim and even the Romaniote Jews. So it has been a bit insular, Aleppo, but no, but actually there has been always osmosis between the communities over all the Mediterranean. Yes, yes, yes. Well, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And getting back to Corie and the book and the question of the Orthodox lifestyle, I guess, would you not say that there is abuse in Casey's marriage?
I wouldn't say that. I would say I was definitely teeter-tottering on a line there. I do think patriarchy was involved in her marriage, and maybe some mental abuse. And again, to me, patriarchy is a dangerous and not desirable thing. And so I didn't, again, set out to write a book that would have anything to do with patriarchy, but even in my short story collection, patriarchy is there. I have experienced it my whole life. I would imagine a lot of women on this call have also. In New Orleans, when I was a little girl, I can tell you stories as a young adult in New York, in my community, in my family, in college at NYU. I have a lot of stories, and they're not solely around the Syrian Jewish community. So that's why I think it was very important for me to write. It's a little bit of Fish Elby. I had to get it off my chest. So that's how it ended up in the book. And yeah, it was again an opportunity to look at, let's say, in a book club where people have read the book, and to dig into certain bits of conversation or certain things that Michael says or does and discuss what's happening here. So it was bringing some of that to light. But again, patriarchy exists in America. It's not, and all over the world. It's not just a strictly Syrian Jewish community thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I went through now most of the questions that came into the chat, and I just want to let everyone know who joined a bit later that tomorrow we will send out this recording to everyone who registered to the talk, so you will be able to watch also the beginning. I'm just commenting on the question that came in, which was already answered in the beginning. So I think I saw that some people joined late, so you will have the opportunity to watch it from the beginning. And also we will, of course, send out a link where you can actually order the book. So those who haven't read it and would like to read it will receive it as well. But of course, it's also on the registration page, so you can even find it today, or you can Google the marriage box and you will find today. But tomorrow we will send it out, including with the recording. So thank you so much, Corie, for sharing your story with us, and thank you, Dora, for putting together this wonderful interview as well. And I see there is one last question that we will give to Audrey for closing. Or I missed it. Audrey, you need to unmute if you would like to ask.
Thank you so much for the book, Corie. I really admired the way you did the verbal interchanges between the characters, because I've been told that's a very difficult part of writing.
Thank you. Dialogue. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's actually my favorite part. I love writing dialogue.
Thank you. And yeah, Corie, you can go into the chat because I've seen a few comments from people who read the book and loved it. And please go and read those comments. So just to give you a little heads up of what's coming on Qesher, next week, exactly at the same time, we're going to host another book club together with Dora, which is called Caravan of Hope, a Bukharan woman's journey to freedom. So that's going to touch on another area. It's in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and much more than that. It's a very, very exciting story of how they basically then eventually got out and also ended up in New York. So it's going to be also a very, very interesting interview and discussion. And our other two talks coming up this week, on Thursday, we will have a talk about Jewish Ukraine. We are continuing our series, this time South and East Ukraine, Mariupol and Kharkiv, that became very famous from the news, but we will focus now on the Jewish heritage. And on Sunday, we will have a talk about Jewish Calcutta, which is originally a Baghdadi community, and we will actually have our presenter joining us from Calcutta, so it will be a little bit earlier to make sure that it's not the middle of night for her. So we hope to see you also in one of these events. Of course, we'll send out tomorrow our upcoming events. So I'll just pass the word back to Corie for closing, and Dora, if you also want to say some closing words. I have mentioned now everything I wanted to, so Dora and Corie, it's your line to close.
I would just like to say thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for showing up here and having this discussion.
And I want to thank everyone for coming, and Corie and Dora and Sebastian as well. And I just want to make sure that a lot of the comments also had to do with the Orthodox community, and make sure you understand what you're talking about when you say Orthodox. And that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, and you'll hear when you talk about the different communities. Orthodoxy isn't necessarily what we see, like you said, in unorthodox and that type of a thing. The Syrian Orthodox is very different than, I would say, the Ashkenazi Orthodox, which is very different than the Persian Orthodox, or Yemenite, or Ethiopian, or etc. So keep that in mind. Don't pigeonhole Orthodox.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
everyone.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.